you actually live in three distinct worlds. What if you turn hardship into grace, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Your three worlds. That's the most important thing to really know. Becoming aware that you actually live in three distinct worlds. Okay, and I really elaborate on Popper's way of seeing the world. So the first world is really the world that's outside of you. Everything that you basically see, nature, for example. The second world is really the way in which you see the first world. In other words, there is a psyche and that's you. In other words, that's a filter. And through this filter, you see the world. In other words, you give it meaning to it. You never really experience the world as it is. You always experience it as you see the world. There is a very powerful saying that says something like, it says more about yourself than about the other person. For example, if you talk about someone badly, that tells more about you than about the person that you are actually talking about badly. In other words, it's really a reflection of your inward world. Now, like, take this example. You fall in love. What happens? You want to capture this moment for eternity. Unfortunately, you can't. Now, why is it that you want to capture this very moment for eternity? It's simple. Because you feel great and therefore you see the world and everything around you amazingly beautiful. And that's the power of the second world. In other words, it's really up to you how you want to see and interpret the world. So, first world is what? What is? So, again, we can never poorly see it as it is, but we can at least take some steps back and deeply reflect on what we face in front of us. And then second step is really to be aware that whatever we see is always mediated through our psyche. That's really what Carl Jung says is your psychic energy, right? And the goal of individuation, the goal of living is really to getting your ego and your unconscious in harmony, that it forms a perfect whole in which you start truly living and experiencing life to the very, very fullest. And that's a lifelong process. Put differently, this life is a transition, because once you die, you will go somewhere else. And even if you are a materialist and think like you end up just dust, yes, but that's also a transition. In other words, you will be always here, just in a different form. In this case, it will be dust. In other words, we are all basically at the very fundamental level atoms, right? And energy can nor be created nor can it be destroyed. And that's really what Father Osterman also says, that if you really look deeply in reality, it ultimately disappears into mathematics. You can infinitely divide numbers, for example. So it's very powerful. So there's a mystery there. So just go back again. I'm sorry, I was on a tangent, but first just reflect on the world, how it actually is. And just look at it from a more relaxed, objective point of view. The world is it is. In other words, if you could potentially zoom out and look at the universe from the touch from the universe itself, it's always is. There's no really changes. The only changes really, or the concept of time that we really feel, is simply the changes we go through because we get older and day and night, and therefore we think like there is something like time. But if you really zoom out, potentially, like think about it like this one. You are basically a cell. And if you are a cell of your body, let's say, of a body, you can never ever see the whole body, right? Because you are in the body, you consist, you make up the body, right? And that's the same with reality. Let's, for example, God. That's why scientists can never ever find God, because it's outside of time and space. In other words, it's the reality upon our reality stands on. Therefore, we can never ever find it, scientifically speaking. Okay? And lastly, the third world of Popper, very powerful. Now we have the first world, that's what you see, everything outside of you. Secondly, the meaning that you give, so what and why. And lastly, it's how, what you actually do of the third and the second world. And that's where your creative act as a human being comes into play. And there's no one who can more powerfully live out who you are and what you are supposed to do than yourself. You are the best in being and doing yourself. No one can better be and do you. That is the most powerful statement that you can really think of, because that's what's really happening in a time of AI. It's all about ultimately you finding truly who you are, and that takes courage. It takes the first world, the second world, and your third world is really your creative act in becoming bold and truly live according to your values, beliefs, and convictions. And if you start doing so, then you change not just your world, but you also change the world around you. And that's really what's happening. You are the universe manifested in every single second. That's Neil Teese, a very, very critical scientist and liver pathologist in New York City, who really said it beautifully. So think about it. So there are three worlds. One is the outside world. The second one is the world in which you look through and see. In other words, it's the acknowledgement that you never ever see the objective, 100% objective world. It's always mediated through your psyche, which is informed by your values, your culture, your beliefs. And lastly, it's your creative act. If you put world 1 and 2 together and are humble, then you start the creative act of building a life that you truly want to live and strive for. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.the-ykm.com. Meant to